It was supposed to be a quiet morning. Just one simple favor-owned shift covered for a friend who had come down with the flu. That's all it was. Nothing special. But fate has a funny way of brewing something bigger from the smallest, clumsiest moments. Linda Lane was halfway through a rushed cappuccino order when it happened. The coffee scorching hot slipped from her tray as she turned too quickly from the espresso machine. It arced through the air in what felt like slow motion before landing squarely on a man's perfectly tailored gray suit. The silence that followed was immediate and deafening. "Oh my God," Linda breathed. "It's Sid." "Scorching hot coffee," she said, her voice trembling as she gestured helplessly toward the growing brown stain soaking into the man's expensive jacket. Her hand froze midair, still clutching a stack of napkins she'd instinctively grabbed. But something in his presence made her hesitate, made her not touch him. The cafe had gone still, like someone hit pause on the whole world. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, with perfectly parted dark hair and a sharp jawline, turned toward her slowly. Like the longer he took, the more dangerous the moment would become. So sorry, sir," Linda stammered. "That was my fault. Please, let me pay for the cleaning." Her voice was quiet, honest, a little broken, but not fake. The man looked down at his jacket, then back at her. "This is a $3,000 suit," he said flatly, his voice clipped like a blade, each syllable biting like frost. "Armani doesn't clean with sorry." Across the cafe, mugs froze midair. Even the crying baby at table 4 fell silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The golden light filtering through the windows seemed to dim behind a curtain of gathering clouds. Linda flinched. She was already wound tight after a string of bad weeks, a lost job at the library, unpaid rent, sleepless nights worrying about her future. This was just another blow, another disaster. But she wouldn't let it break her. She straightened her shoulders, though her cheeks flushed with heat. "You're right," she said, steadier now. "If I could rewind 5 seconds, I would. But I can't. All I can do is say, I'm truly sorry. And I am." There was no drama in her voice. No excuses. Just plain, unpolished regret. The man blinked, surprised. Maybe by her words. Maybe by her refusal to grovel. Either way, his jaw slackened ever so slightly, and the tension around his shoulders seemed to ease just enough to feel the shift. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. With a practiced grace, he dabbed at the stain himself, brown against gray, a mess against order. Linda watched him cautiously, unsure what to expect. But instead of more anger, he exhaled sharply, like steam escaping from under pressure. Not quite forgiveness, but something close. He looked at her name tag. Linda, Tmont Café. He didn't know she'd taken this shift for someone else. Didn't know she'd cried herself to sleep in a studio apartment the night before. Didn't know this morning's chaos was all she had to hold on to. But he saw something. He pulled out a small business card and slid it across the counter. "I'll have it cleaned," he said. His voice had dropped, no longer made of ice. "Accidents happen." And after a beat, "Be careful next time." That was hot. Linda blinked, caught between relief and disbelief. "Yes, sir, thank you." And then he left. The glass door sighed, closed behind him, and Linda just stood there, card in hand, heart pounding like a metronome gone wild. "Are you okay?" her coworker asked, passing by. "Yeah," she said, then paused. "I think so." But the moment wouldn't leave her alone. Why hadn't he exploded? Why hadn't he demanded the manager or made a scene? She replayed the encounter over and over again during the rest of her shift, through sticky syrup bottles, late morning rushes, and tired espresso shots. Her mind kept circling back to the man in the suit, to the flash of something softer in his eyes, the hesitation before he left, the faintest flicker of humanity beneath all that money and polish. A few minutes later, just before her break, she noticed movement outside the window. There he was, standing beside the café awning. He pulled something from his Pochetta receipt. He scribbled on the back with a pen, folded it, slipped it into his wallet, and walked away. Linda watched him go, unsure why the sight of him leaving left behind an ache she didn't quite understand. Alan Walker sat alone in his glass-walled office, the city stretching endlessly behind him in steel and gold. He should have been focused on the document on his desk, a legal deadline looming like a guillotine. 60 days. That's how long he had before his father's will would trigger a clause that could ruin everything. If he wasn't married by the end of the quarter, Walker Enterprises would be absorbed by Blake Internationale, so-called merger that was anything but friendly. Alan had built this company from scratch, brick by brick. 10 years of sacrifices, no social life, no rest, no mistakes. And now, all of it could be taken away unless he found a wife? He scoffed out loud. A wife? He had tried. Matchmakers, influencers, women his board members deemed suitable. But none of them had seen him. Not really. Not beneath the title. He ran a hand down his face, exasperated. And then he remembered her. The barista. Linda. Not polished. Not part of the world, but undeniably real. And for some reason, all day, she had stayed with him, her voice, her regret, her dignity. She didn't know who he was, and maybe that's why she mattered. Alan reached for the phone. Carla? He said when his assistant picked up. Yes, sir? I want to set up a new assistant interview. Replacing Maria? You just renewed her contract. Number. This is different. A pause. Find the girl from the Tamont Café. Blonde, 20s, morning shift. Sir, are you suggesting we hire a barista? Set up a discreet interview, Alan said. Bring her in as a temp. Trial basis. Another pause. Understood. As he hung up the phone, Alan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He knew this was reckless, maybe even unethical. But something about her, something in that one chaotic moment, he'd shaken loose something he'd buried a long time ago. He didn't need someone perfect. He needed someone honest. And somehow, that morning, coffee and all, Linda Lane had seen through the suit and into the man. Linda Lane stood in front of the towering glass building, her reflection faint in the polished surface of Walker Enterprises' entry doors. Her heart beat a little faster as she stared up at the skyline, trying to remember how she'd ended up here. She hadn't applied for this job. She hadn't even sent in a resume. And yet, here she was, invited to interview for a temporary assistant position at one of the most prestigious companies in Boston. A part of her wanted to turn around, to pretend she hadn't gotten the call, but curiosity and some strange instinct she couldn't quite name had told her to say yes. She adjusted the collar of her borrowed blazer, trying not to think about how it didn't quite fit. Her friend Macy had lent it to her that morning, promising it made her look just professional enough. She stepped into the sleek lobby, the marble floors echoing beneath her worn heels. Everything was glass, steel, and order. Clean lines, quiet confidence. It felt like another planet compared to the clatter and chaos of the cafe. An assistant met her with a clipboard and a warm but slightly confused smile. Miss Lane? Right this way. Linda followed her into a private elevator. The doors slid shut and whisked her to the top floor. The ride was quiet, smooth, unnerving. When they opened again, she stepped into what could only be described as a modern palace disguised as an office. Glass walls framed a panoramic view of the harbor. Sculptures and abstract art lined the space. And behind a massive desk stood the man she hadn't expected to see again. Alan Walker. The same man she had spilled coffee on. The same man whose suit she'd nearly ruined. Except now, he wasn't just a customer. He was him, the CEO. The reason she was here. He didn't mention the coffee, didn't bring up the stain or the apology or the awkward tension in the café. Instead, he nodded and gestured to the seat across from his desk. Miss Lane, thank you for coming. Linda sat slowly, eyebrows drawn. I still don't understand why I was invited. I've never worked in an office before. I'm not really... She gestured vaguely around. This. Alan folded his hands on the desk. I need someone who can think quickly, who speaks honestly, someone who's not afraid of titles or suits. Linda tilted her head slightly, suspicious. You got all that from me? Dumping coffee on your chest? A flicker of amusement passed over his face. It was a memorable introduction. She stared at him, then slowly smiled despite herself. I guess it was. And just like that, she was hired. No paperwork, no HR meeting, just an agreement to start as a temporary assistant the following Monday. What Alan didn't say, what he couldn't yet say, was that this was part of a plan. But even plans have a way of unraveling when real life gets involved. Her first few days at Walker Enterprises were a blur. Everything moved fast. Meetings, calls, schedules, names she didn't recognize, and acronyms she couldn't decode. But Linda adapted. She was good at that. What set her apart wasn't experience or polish, it was her presence. She didn't try to impress, didn't laugh at unfunny jokes or fawn over Alan's title. She just worked, asked questions, took notes, made coffee. Strong coffee. Too strong, Alan muttered one morning, coughing politely. Linda raised an eyebrow. Then maybe say, please, when you want a new one. Alan blinked. People didn't talk to him like that. But she did. And strangely, he liked it. Something about Linda changed the rhythm of his world. The way she challenged tasks that didn't make sense. The way she corrected him politely, but firmly when he barked at interns without looking them in the eye. I know you're the boss, she said one afternoon after a tense meeting, but people work better when they feel seen. Alan had no response. He just stared at her, because no one ever said things like that to him. And yet, she was right. Before long, everyone in the office started noticing the shift. People who used to whisper behind glass doors now shared ideas more freely. Break room conversations stopped sounding like military debriefings. Alan, the man once dubbed the Ice King by half the staff, had started asking questions instead of issuing commands. Even the board noticed. You seem more approachable, one of the members said during a video call. Alan shrugged it off, but in the back of his mind he knew. It wasn't him. It was her. What Linda didn't know was how late Alan stayed some nights reviewing numbers, yes, but also just watching her. Not creepily, quietly. One night, long after the office had emptied out, Alan returned from a call to find Linda asleep in the corner of his office, curled up with her tablet in her lap and a stack of notes on the armrest beside her. She looked exhausted, peaceful, vulnerable, in a way he wasn't used to seeing. For a long moment, he just stood there, not moving. Then he walked to the closet, grabbed the light throw blanket he kept for late nights, and gently draped it over her shoulders. His hand lingered for a heartbeat before he pulled it back. Then, quietly, he turned off the nearby lamp and stepped out, closing the office door behind him. What he didn't realize was that Carla, his executive secretary, had seen the whole thing from the hallway. By morning, the entire floor buzzed not with gossip, but with quiet admiration. The ruthless CEO had just revealed a heart. Linda woke up alone the next day, the blanket neatly tucked around her and a sticky note left on her tablet. "Take the day off. Come back rested, eh?" She smiled, a little surprised by how much it touched her. And maybe, just maybe, something inside her shifted too. From that day on, something changed between them. Alan started asking for her opinion not just on scheduling, but on people, projects, strategies. And when she gave it, she didn't hold back. "This pitch deck looks fine," she said once, flipping through slides. "But your language about small businesses feels cold. Maybe lead with the people, not the numbers." He rewrote it that night. That was the thing Alan listened to her. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. What started as a temporary assistant role was becoming something else entirely. It was late nights, long conversations, side-by-side brainstorming sessions over takeout containers and half-empty coffee cups. Somewhere in the margin between PowerPoints and lunch breaks, they'd begun orbiting closer. Neither of them said anything, but everyone could feel it. And the thing about feelings? They have a way of rewriting even the most carefully crafted plans. Alan Walker wasn't used to traveling with anyone. In fact, his team had always known he flew solo. Always. He didn't like distractions, didn't do small talk in terminals, and certainly didn't care for chit-chat at hotel check-ins. Work was work, clean, controlled. But this time, he invited Linda. Officially, she was there to assist take notes, coordinate meetings, and ensure the Chicago Business Conference ran smoothly. Unofficially, Alan wasn't sure he wanted to go without her. The trip started off smoothly. Their flight left on time. The hotel was modern and sleek. Their first round of client meetings went better than expected, partly because Alan was on point, but mostly because people noticed something new in him. A calmness. A warmth. "You've mellowed," one investor joked as they stepped out of a negotiation session. "She's good for you." Alan opened his mouth to deflect, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. Linda, walking beside him, hadn't heard, but if she had, she might have smiled, or maybe asked what "good for you" even meant when they were just coworkers on a business trip. At least, that's what they both kept telling themselves. The turning point came on the way home. Their return flight was delayed. Storm systems had rolled across the East Coast, grounding flights and fraying tempers. The terminal buzzed with tension. Angry passengers, crying children, overhead announcements apologizing for the inconvenience. And that's when they saw him. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5, standing near a trash can, crying uncontrollably, no adult in sight. Most people glanced his way, hesitated, and kept walking. But not Linda. She was already moving before Alan could even register what was happening. She knelt beside the boy, soft and calm. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The boy sniffled and nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Two can't find my mom." "What's your name?" "Tyler." "Okay, Tyler," she said, her voice a soothing balm against the chaos of the terminal. "We're going to find your mom. I promise. You're not alone." She stayed beside him, asking soft questions, wiping his face with a napkin from her bag, keeping him calm. Alan flagged down airport security, who quickly took over. Within minutes, a panicked mother came sprinting through the crowd, sobbing as she dropped to her knees and scooped Tyler into her arms. Linda stepped back as the mother thanked her over and over. Her hand stayed gently on the boy's back until he was safe. Alan stood nearby, watching it all. And something shifted. In the middle of that chaotic airport, something small and quiet cracked open inside him. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around to see if anyone else would help. She just moved, like someone who was made to care. They finally boarded their late-night flight a few hours later. The cabin was dim. Passengers dozed off with neck pillows and half-watched in-flight movies. Linda sat by the window, her head resting against the glass, her breath even and slow. Alan sat beside her, silent. He couldn't stop replaying the moment with the boy. The way she had spoken, the way she had comforted without even thinking. He glanced at her now blonde hair, tousled, mouth slightly parted in sleep, peaceful, unaware. And for the first time in years, Alan let himself imagine a life that didn't start and end in a boardroom. A life that included late nights that weren't about work. A partner who made him laugh without trying. Someone who didn't care about his last name, or his net worth, or the weight of his empire. Just him. Linda shifted in her sleep, curling slightly toward him. And Alan exhaled quietly. He was falling. Falling for the woman he'd hired as part of a plan. A plan that was unraveling fast. Back in Boston, the city welcomed them with another storm. Rain pounded the sidewalks. Winds rattled windows. The Walker Enterprises building glowed faintly against the night sky as Alan and Linda rode the elevator up in silence, both soaked and shivering. They should have gone home. But Alan had a board report due by morning. Linda, as always, stayed behind to help. By 10 p.m., the streets were flooded and the subway stalled. Her phone buzzed with alerts. "You're not going out in that," Alan said. "I'll call a cab." "Number, you'll stay here." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "We've got a guest suite on the executive floor." He said it quietly, gently, like a request, not a command. And something about that made her say yes. Later, they sat in his office with Thai takeout containers balanced on a small side table and soft jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker. The lights were dim, the rain a muffled drumbeat against the glass. Linda laughed at something he said in offhand comment about his tragic lack of chopstick skills and wiped a bit of sauce from the corner of her mouth. Alan watched her. His heart pounded harder than it should. The air shifted. She looked up at him, their gazes locking. It was quiet, intimate, real. And for a split second, she leaned in. So did he. Their faces were inches apart, breath shared. Time paused. And then Alan stopped, pulled back. Linda blinked, confused. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice thick with something he couldn't name. "It's okay," she whispered, searching his eyes. He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to. But something coiled in his chest guilt, fear, maybe even shame. Because she didn't know the truth about why she was here, about how she hadn't just been hired for her skills, about how she was never just an assistant. Not to the board, not to the plan, and not to him. Linda leaned back slowly, the warmth fading from her expression. She didn't push, didn't ask questions. But something in her eyes flickered, and Alan felt it. Like a hairline crack forming across something fragile. He stared out at the rain, fists clenched in his lap, and knew he was running out of time. Because what he felt now wasn't strategy. It wasn't convenient. It was real. And that made it dangerous. Friday afternoon, rain pattered steadily against the windows of Walker Enterprises. The sky outside had turned a soft, moody gray, the kind that made the city feel quieter, almost sleepy. Most of the staff had gone home early, grateful for the excuse the weather provided, but not Linda. She had stayed behind to help Alan organize files for Monday's board review. Her blazer was draped over the back of her chair, sleeves rolled up, hair tucked behind her ears as she sorted folders with quiet focus. Alan had stepped out briefly to take a call downstairs. The office was calm, filled only with the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional sigh of wind against glass. That's when it happened. A soft notification pinged on Alan's desktop monitor. Linda barely noticed at first until the subject line flashed in bold. Prenup draft. Plan B confirmation. Linda Lane. She stared at it, frowned. It had her name. Curiosity nudged her toward the screen. She hesitated. She wasn't the snooping type, but this felt like something she was meant to see. Some part of her already knew the answer, even before she clicked. She opened the email. The sender was a legal contact, Alan's attorney. The message was short, precise, clinical. And attached was a PDF, a prenup agreement, drafted and labeled as part of a contingency plan. Her name was in it. In black and white, Linda Lane, the backup, the fallback, Plan B. If the original arrangement with candidate A fell through, proceed to implement the contingency agreement with Miss Linda Lane. Her current employment and proximity provide a seamless narrative for public presentation. The words hit her like a slap. Employment and proximity. A seamless narrative. Plan B. Her breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, the walls around her didn't feel safe or sleek. They felt like a trap. Her stomach twisted. The air grew thin. All the late nights, all the conversations, all the moments she thought had meant something replayed now in a cruel new light. It hadn't started because he saw her. It started because she was useful. The perfect accidental solution to a very corporate problem. Alan stepped back into the office, hair slightly damp from the rain, still tucking his phone into his coat pocket. He stopped short the moment he saw her. She was standing rigidly by his desk, her bag clutched in one hand, her eyes blazing. "Linda?" he said carefully. "What's... You really thought I wouldn't find out?" She interrupted, her voice low, vibrating with fury. Alan froze. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes shimmered, not with softness, but with betrayal. "The prenup," she said. "The email, planned by him." Alan's face went pale. "Linda, I can explain." "Number." She held up a hand. "Don't insult me by pretending this wasn't calculated." She stepped forward, every word landing like a knife. "You hired me knowing exactly who I was. You watched me, tested me. You let me believe this Seuss was real." "It became real," Alan said, voice breaking. "It is real." Linda gave a bitter laugh, quiet and sharp. "Right after I passed whatever internal checklist you had for a wife." "Linda, I was convenient, Alan. I was accessible, disposable. That's not." "Then what's true?" she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of it all. "That I was second choice? That someone else said no, and I was just next in line?" Alan stepped toward her, hands raised, desperate. But she backed away. "I let myself believe in you," she whispered. "I defended you when people called you cold and calculating. I thought they were wrong." She paused, eyes burning into his. They were right. Silence. Only the soft rumble of thunder outside filled the space between them. "You looked at me and saw a solution," she said, "not a person." Alan's mouth opened, but no words came. "I don't want your money," she continued, voice now quiet, steady. "I don't want your apology. I don't want anything from you." "Please," he said, "just one word. Raw. Bare." She shook her head. Her first tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. "You don't get to say please. Not now." And then, without another word, she turned. Alan didn't chase her. Couldn't. He stood frozen in place, drowning in the wreckage of his own creation, as the elevator doors slid shut behind her. He was alone. Again. That night, Alan sat in his office. Lights off, curtains drawn. He didn't go home. Didn't answer calls. Didn't check email. The documents on his descants, the most important things in his world, now blurred into meaningless lines and empty promises. He stared at the skyline beyond the glass. The city glowed, oblivious to his unraveling. For 3 days, Alan was a ghost. Meetings were postponed, clients rescheduled. He barely ate, barely slept. All he could hear were her words. "You looked at me and saw a solution, not a person." And she was right. He had hired her for a reason. And somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing her as a reason and started seeing her as the only real thing in his world. Now she was gone. He wandered the city. No destination, no umbrella, no plan. He found himself on Tiemont Street, outside the tiny café where it had all started. The bell chimed softly as he stepped inside. No one recognized him. He ordered a plain black coffee, Saturday at the corner table by the window, and waited. Every day for a week, he came back. At 10 a.m. he'd arrive. At 4 p.m. he'd leave. No fanfare, no agenda. Just watching the door, hoping, wishing. She never came. On the 7th day, he left a $20 bill beneath his empty cup and walked to the nearby park. He sat on a bench, watching ducks glide across the pond, wondering how something so good had slipped through his fingers. That night, he opened the prenup email again. Read every line. Cold. Transactional. Proof of everything he had done wrong. Then he opened a blank sheet of paper and wrote something he hadn't expected. His resignation. By hand. Alan Walker stood before the Walker Enterprises Board of Directors like a ghost of his former self-suit, rumpled, face drawn, eyes hollow with sleeplessness. 12 executives sat in polished leather chairs, confused, expectant. The air was stiff with silence. He laid the envelope on the center of the table. "What is this?" one member asked cautiously. "My resignation," Alan replied. Calm, clear. The room erupted in a storm of objections. "Alan, this company is your life. You built this from the ground up. What about the merger? The clause?" "I'm breaking the clause," he said flatly. "Let the merger happen. Let the board vote. Let it burn if it has to." Another executive leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're throwing away your legacy. All because of a woman?" Alan paused, then smiled, but it was tired, honest. "Number, I'm walking away because of the man I became trying to keep it. I lied. I manipulated. I turned something pure into a scheme. And for what?" He looked around the room. "If I can't have her with truth, then I don't want anything that was built on lies." Without another word, he turned and walked out. Not just of the boardroom, out of the empire he had built, out of the life that had once defined him, and into something unknown but finally real. That afternoon, Alan returned to the little café on Tremont Street. The place hadn't changed. Warm wood counters, soft lighting, the low hum of jazz and espresso machines. He ordered her favorite drink of vanilla chai latte with almond milk and sat at the corner table again. The barista raised an eyebrow. "You come here a lot. Looking for someone?" Alan smiled faintly. "Yeah. She must be important." "She is." He returned the next day. And the next? He didn't speak much, just ordered the same drink. Saturday, in the same seat. Waited. Hoped. The barista eventually asked, "What did she do?" "The girl?" "She spilled coffee on me," he said. The barista laughed. "Must have been some spill." Alan didn't explain. Instead, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The original receipt from the day it all started. He had written something on the back in neat handwriting. "The best mistake of my life. If you still remember, I'll be waiting at the same table." Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Linda Lane stood beneath the awning of the Commonwealth Avenue Public Library. Her breath fogged slightly in the afternoon chill. She wore a simple blue coat, her hair pulled back, eyes quiet but alert. After everything that had happened, she had returned here back to where she felt grounded, back to books, quiet spaces, and the kind of peace that didn't depend on anyone's approval. She had cried, felt anger, felt stupid, but most of all, she had missed him. Not the CEO, not the office. Him, the man who once turned off a lamp so she could sleep undisturbed. The man who brought her takeout and let her challenge his board presentations. The man who, despite everything, had started to change. She had expected him to defend himself when she left. He hadn't. He'd let her go. And in that silence, something spoke louder than anything he could have said. That day, as she stepped outside to lock the front doors of the library, she saw him. Alan, standing across the street. No suit, just a simple wool coat. Rain sprinkled lightly, softening the sharp edges of the world. He looked differentless, polished, more human. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. He crossed slowly, step by step, never breaking eye contact. When he stopped just a few feet away, he spoke first, voice low, vulnerable. "Hi." "Hi," she replied, her arms folded gently across her chest. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said, "but I needed to say something. Not to fix anything, just to tell the truth." She said nothing. "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of the company, not of losing money, but of letting someone in, letting you in." He glanced down, then back at her. "I thought if I controlled everything, even love, I could avoid getting hurt." Linda's eyes didn't soften, but she didn't walk away either. "I created a script," he continued. "I thought if I found someone who didn't know me, I could shape the story the way I needed it to go. But then you walked in, and nothing followed the script anymore." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded receipt. "I kept this," he said. "From the day you spilled coffee on me. I don't know why I held on to it. Maybe because I knew even then something had started." He handed it to her. She unfolded it, slowly, carefully. "Read the words." Her fingers trembled. "Linda," he said gently, "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not here to win you back or beg." He took a breath. "I just wanted you to know. I left the company. I walked away from everything that was built on lies, because I finally understood what I really wanted, what was worth keeping." He stepped back, giving her space. "I'll be at the café," he added. "Same table, just in case." And then He turned and walked away. Didn't look back. Linda stared down at the receipt. Her fingers clutched it to her chest. A part of her wanted to cry. Another part wanted to run. But somewhere in the quiet center of her chest, something else stirred. Hope. The next morning, just as the cafe doors opened and the bell chimed softly into the warm air, she stepped inside. The cafe hadn't changed. The soft scent of espresso, the warm buzz of morning chatter, the familiar clink of cups, and the lazy hum of jazz. But for Linda Lane, everything felt different. She stood just inside the door, her coat still dusted with morning chill, fingers curled around the edges of the old receipt she'd held all night. It was folded and unfolded so many times. The creases had gone soft. Her heart pounded. And then she saw him, Alan Walker, sitting at the corner table. Same spot, same quiet posture. But this time, there was no suit, no briefcase, no armor. Just a man, waiting. Their eyes met, and the noise around them seemed to fade. The cafe, full of life, blurred into the background. He stood, almost instinctively. "I was hoping you'd come," he said, voice quiet, unsure. "I wasn't sure," Linda replied, her voice just above a whisper. "Not until this morning." He nodded. He didn't push, didn't rush. "May I get you a coffee?" She raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Only if you promise not to spill it this time." He actually laughed. "Deal." He turned toward the barista, who had already prepped a to-go cup with a scribbled heart on the lid. Alan brought it back and gently set it in front of her. Linda looked down at it, amused. "You're giving me coffee to go?" "Just open it," he said softly. She carefully removed the lid. Inside, nestled among a folded napkin and a tiny paper note, was a small velvet ring box. Linda froze. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling ever so slightly as she lifted the box. Alan dropped to one knee beside the table, right there in the middle of the cafe. The barista stopped mid-pour. The young couple by the window leaned in, eyes wide. A little girl near the pastry case whispered loudly, "Mommy, is he proposing?" But Alan didn't notice any of it. His eyes were on her. "I don't want a wife for business," he began. "I don't want contracts or convenience. I don't want someone perfect on paper." He took a breath, the kind of breath that steadied everything inside. "I want you for life." Linda blinked, and her eyes filled instantly. "You challenge me. You see me. And somehow, after everything, you still came back." He smiled, voice rough with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that." He opened the ring box. Simple, elegant. A single stone with a band like the first, Snow Quiet, unpretentious, timeless. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came. Then she nodded. "Once? Twice?" "Yes," she whispered. Alan stood slowly, hands careful as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The cafe erupted into spontaneous applause. Someone clapped. Someone whistled. The barista rang the service bell twice and shouted, "Free coffee all day in honor of real love." Alan laughed and leaned in, kissing her softly, reverently, like the world had tilted, just to align with that moment. Linda smiled through tears, glancing down at her hand. "I guess this was the best cup of coffee after all," she murmured. Outside the window, the sun broke through the clouds. And in that little cafe on Tiemont Street where everything had started with one spilled cup and a clumsy apology, the real story finally began. 3 months later, the penthouse looked different. Gone were the sterile surfaces, the rigid color palette, the museum-like decor that screamed executive living. In its place were books stacked in corners, warm throw blankets draped over the back of chairs, and a faint smell of cinnamon muffins cooling on the kitchen counter. It didn't look like a CEO's fortress anymore. It looked like a home. And Alan Walker looked like a man learning how to live in one. Linda sat cross-legged on the couch, hair in a messy bun, reading aloud from a paperback she'd picked up at the library's donation bin. Alan sat beside her, not listening to the story so much as watching her lips move, soaking in the simplicity of the moment. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I am," he replied. She lowered the book, a smile playing at her mouth. "You know, normal couples usually pretend not to be obsessed with each other for at least the first year." Alan shrugged. "Normal never got me very far." She laughed, and he leaned in to kiss her cheek. But love outside of scripted mergers and boardroom strategies was messier than either of them had anticipated. At first, everything had felt surreal: coffee dates without tension, weekend trips without calendars, laughter without restraint. But slowly, reality began to creep in. Not the kind of reality where love fades. The kind where love deepens. Where it gets tested. One night, Alan sat on the edge of the bed, his tie discarded on the nightstand, head in his hands. "I feel useless," he admitted. Linda looked up from the closet, folding laundry. "You just stepped down from running a billion-dollar company. Of course it's going to feel weird." "It's not just that," he said. "I'm scared." She blinked. "Of what?" He looked up, eyes raw. "Of failing at this." Linda walked over, sat beside him, and took his hand. "You can't spreadsheet love, Alan. You can't optimize it, but you can show up for it." He nodded, jaw tight. "Even when I'm a mess?" "Especially then." They moved into a brownstone on the quieter side of the city. Nothing flashy, just enough space for two people and all the life they were building together. Linda kept volunteering at the library, eventually accepting a part-time position helping coordinate community literacy programs. Alano Longer CEO took time to rediscover what it meant to be more than his job. He started mentoring young entrepreneurs, quietly, no press, no spotlight. He liked it that way. He was no longer the man who needed control to feel safe. He was learning to trust love without a contract. But not everything was smooth. Some nights, Linda would get quiet, not angry, just distant. The kind of quiet that said, "I need space." Alan struggled not to take it personally. "Did I say something wrong?" he'd ask. "No," she'd answer honestly. "I just need time to feel normal in this. It still surprises me how real it all is." And he understood. Because truthfully, it scared him too. That she could still leave. That even though there was a ring, there was no clause keeping her here. Only choice. One Sunday morning, as they walked through the farmer's market, Linda stopped at a flower stand, running her fingers over a bunch of sunflowers. Alan handed the vendor a 10 and bought them for her without saying a word. As they walked home, she glanced sideways at him. "You know, you don't have to keep proving anything." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just happy to have someone to buy flowers for." She tucked her hand into his. And in that small gesture, intertwined fingers, and silent understanding, they both felt it. This was the kind of life they were building. Not perfect, but present. Weeks later, Linda came home to find the kitchen, a mess pans on the stove, flour everywhere, Alan in an apron that read "Kiss the Cook" with batter on his cheek. He looked up, sheepish. "I tried to make your mom's banana bread. It, didn't rise." Linda blinked, surprised. "You called my mom?" He nodded. "Yeah. Figured if I'm going to marry you, I should probably learn what your favorite comfort food tastes like when it's not delivered." She walked over, kissed the flour off his cheek, and whispered, "You're rising just fine." Not long after that, they decided to plan a wedding. Nothing extravagant. Just close friends, a little music, and the cafe where it all began. Yes, the same one. The owner even offered to cater for free. Because, as he put it, a spilled latte never led to better marketing. And on the day they picked up their wedding license, Linda found herself staring at Alan across the city clerk's office and thinking, this started with a mistake. A very hot, very messy mistake. And somehow, it became the best decision she ever made. The little cafe on Tiemont Street was closed to the public for the day. But inside, it was alive with light. Twinkle bulbs framed the windows. Vintage vases filled with fresh wildflowers sat on every table, and the familiar hum of the espresso machine provided a background rhythm steady, soothing, warm. Linda Lane stood near the front counter, hands nervously adjusting her bouquet. Macy, her best friend and former cafe coworker, smiled as she secured the final pin in Linda's simple updo. "You know," she said, "I still remember the look on your face the day you spilled that coffee." Linda laughed softly. "Pretty sure I thought I was about to get sued, or at least fired from a shift I didn't even belong on. And now?" Linda looked out toward the cafe's corner, table their table. Her voice softened. "Now I'm marrying the man whose dry cleaning bill changed everything." Outside, Alan waited. No tux, no entourage, just a tailored charcoal suit and a nervous energy he hadn't felt since the day he pitched his first startup. He shifted his weight, glanced through the cafe window, and caught a glimpse of her silhouette. His heart stuttered. The man who once built his world with contracts and control now stood completely unraveled by one woman who had walked into his life by accident and never left. As the ceremony began, a small group of friends and family gathered inside. The same barista who once watched them argue over a ruined suit now stood behind the counter, grinning as she pulled espresso shots during the vows. The officiant, a retired librarian Linda had once read children's books with, cleared her throat and smiled. "Dear friends, we are here today in the most sacred of places where drinks spill, hearts open, and lattes sometimes lead to love." A soft laugh rippled through the guests. And then, as the room stilled, Alan turned to Linda. "I used to believe everything had to follow a plan," he said, voice even but thick with emotion. "That love could be strategized, structured, controlled." He shook his head, eyes locked on hers. "But then I met you, and everything that made sense stopped. You were chaos. You were honesty. You were real. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that coffee wasn't the start of a mistake." He took her hand. "It was the start of the best story I've ever lived." Linda took a breath. "I never imagined my life colliding with someone like you," she said. "Your world was glass and marble. Mine was chipped mugs and library late fees. But when everything around us got loud somehow, your quiet meant the most." She squeezed his hand gently. "You didn't just ask me to be your assistant. You let me be myself. You saw me, and even when it started with a lie, you found the courage to rewrite it in truth." Her voice caught. "I'm not promising perfection. I'm promising presence, coffee, patience, honesty, and maybe a few spills." The vows ended. There were no grand pronouncements, just a kiss tender, unhurried, and completely theirs. The café erupted in applause. The barista rang the bell above the register. Someone from the back yelled, "Free lattes for lovebirds." Later, they danced slowly between tables. No fancy DJ, just a playlist Alan had made himself filled with songs he never used to admit he liked until Linda walked into his life. They didn't talk much during the dance. They didn't need to. Every step, every smile, every glance said what words never could. Outside, dusk settled on Boston. The streetlights flickered on. The wind curled gently through the alleyways. And from the window, the corner table sat empty for the first time in weeks. Because its story was no longer unfolding. It had arrived. From one spilled cup to a life forever changed, Alan and Linda's story isn't just about redemption. It's about the unexpected way love finds us, when we're unprepared, unpolished, and most ourselves. Because sometimes the most meaningful chapters don't start with perfect plans. They start with a mistake and end with a miracle. A handwritten sign taped to the cafe wall near the counter reads, "The best mistake of my life happened right here. Ask us about it." A and L. If this story stirred something in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. We believe the best tales are the ones that remind us. Love doesn't always come easy, but when it's real, it's always worth it. Until next time, stay open to the unexpected. It just might change your life.